Aloha and welcome to Better Government, which is all about your government at the Hawaii State Capitol. I'm Representative Gene Ward, and today I'm having a discussion with Representative George Fontaine from Maui. Welcome, George.
Thank you for having me.
We are going to be talking about what happened yesterday. 10 hours of debate on the floor. But just to give you the context, let me note that this is the second crossover. How would you explain to the people viewing, what is second crossover? Will you guys cross your swords twice, or what did we do?
Well, it actually could be that. I don't know. We could have.
Yeah, we
did cross some swords yesterday, but basically this was the final reading, or the third reading for the all the Senate bills that we've been hearing for the last month or so, and basically pushing it out the door to go on and go to conference, and some of these will, of course, eventually become law. We don't know what will happen in conference, and we hope that some of these more egregious bills that have been sent up to be reviewed in conference will have some positive changes, and it won't be as egregious. There were some very, very bad bills yesterday that went forward.
We're going to get to some details.
But I think what the viewers should know is that, you know, this whole session has been really about expanding the powers of government. And, you know, we've seen it on the federal level, and now we're seeing it on the state level. And there were just so many bills that went through.
Examples. You want to give some examples?
Well, there are bills that exempt government from environmental protection laws.
Oh, you're talking about SB 755?
Yes, that was a big one. There were other bills that exempted government from other laws and increasing the power of government agencies, in particular like the National Guard and some other areas. And then what was especially troubling too was the number of bills that basically eroded the transparency of government. And we saw this one with the Office of Information Practices, in which basically now if the agency refuses to give you information, these people have to go to court to do it. And then we saw a whole slew of increases in taxes and fees. And you know, taken one by one, they don't look that bad. But when you look at them in totality, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. You know, you're talking about, you know, raising fees from everything to obtaining death certificates to getting married, you know, getting copies of your birth certificate, which is going to be a real concern now because we have the Real ID coming up forward, which is going to require you now when you renew your driver's license to basically have your birth certificate or passport or other forms. So now if you don't happen to have your birth certificate, or you need to go and get a copy of your birth certificate because you've lost it, that's going to hit consumers in the pocket. So, you know, on top of trying to deal with the whole issue of high energy prices in Hawaii and looking at the high cost of living, we're sacking it to the citizenry a lot more user fees. And we have, by the way, we are the highest state in the nation for fees. Presently, we have over 160 different kinds of fees that we pay. And if this session goes through with these fees that are happening, that number is going to go up even further.
People still have a bite at the apple in that we still have 3 more weeks to go. Essentially, is what you said, the 3 parts that the legislature is divided into. We're at the actually at the second part. The first part is we take our House bills, send them over to the Senate.
Right.
And then they send theirs to us. We've just finished dealing with their bills. And now the third part is when the disagreement between the House and the Senate, we go to conference committee, and that's where the people do have another chance to make a comment about. Georgia, you've given an excellent overview of all the themes that have taken place. Can we go down into maybe some of the trees and look at some of the details?
Absolutely, but I want to remind the viewers that during conference there is no public testimony. So even though these things come up, you will not be able to provide testimony at conference. So if you don't know who your legislator is now, this is a good time to get acquainted with his email address so that you can communicate your testimony or your misgivings about a particular measure that we may be considering in conference.
Do you want to speak to your constituents on Maui? How do they get a hold of you?
I'm very easy. I'm Rep Fontaine at capital.hawaii.gov, Rep Fontaine at capital.hawaii.gov.
And I'm Hawaii Kai Kalama Valley, Rep Ward, Hawaii. Capital.hawaii.gov.
Right.
We don't usually email ourselves. But let's go back into the theme for the exemptions. The exemption themes particularly on the environmental. As some have seen the news clips today, Representative Thielen was captured saying, damn the environment, full speed ahead. And SB 755 was one of those macro exemptions. Do you recall some of the floor debate yesterday that went on quite some time?
I do. You know, this is a bill that basically would exempt only government projects.
Just
now.
government, not the private sector. Not
and
you
it
guys
basically takes
jobs.
away all the environmental assessment rules and regulations for government projects, and not just at airports, but for everywhere. And the whole idea is that, you know, what the argument is, well, we need to do this because we have shovel-ready projects and we need to get these going and we need to put people back to work. You know, but in the reality is that we have projects now, and I think, you know, Representative Rier was very succinct in explaining, even like on Maui, and there's like 3 different projects, like $30 million worth of projects at the Maui airport that have already gone through the assessment and everything else, and yet no contract has been awarded to get those bulldozers out there to do the job. So there are projects that are already ready to go that have already gone through the review process. So, you know, it's very, very dangerous when we start tinkering with the environment. And I was explaining this to somebody in the elevator today. It's like, you know, once you destroy the environment, you know, you never get it back. And we always have to look at the unintended consequences every time we pick up a shovel or dig a ditch or pour concrete or anything else. What are the unintended consequences? And that's why we need to have these environmental laws in place. And they were put there for exactly that purpose. Otherwise, we would have no reef. We would probably have lost a lot of our endangered species, and this place would be like Orange County. You know, it would be nothing. It would be houses and streets, and there would be no culture or native wildlife or anything else left on the island.
As the saying has been, our economy is our environment is our economy.
Absolutely.
And as you astutely point out, as did Senator Sloan, this is only for government projects.
Right.
What about the private sector, which is really the engine of the economy? And if we want to really rev it up, we should say, if we really believe that we should give the environmental exemptions to, and make a pass to pump the economy and jobs.
Well,
we haven't done it.
I thought Speaker's comment to you yesterday when we were talking about this on the floor, you know, you said to him that exact thing. Well, why don't we make everybody exempt? And then Speaker's response was, well, we just didn't have the stomach to do that. You know, we figured we could get this through with just the government. And then you fired back and said, well, what if I do an amendment right now? You know, and of course he shut you down. And you know, yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, if what's good for one is good for all, and I mean, private industry needs help as well too. Government projects do make up a substantial part of construction that does happen here in the islands, but so does the private sector. I think that about 70% of the projects that are out there are actually private you know, companies that are doing these on private commercial buildings and other things.
As much as we try to think that government is the beginning and end of all economic development, it's really the private sector where 65–75% of the jobs are,
right,
and where the economy and the engine of the economy that keeps really us in an equilibrium as a stable society, that's where it's at. And this is where the exemption has come in. Some of the other things that came up yesterday when we talked about exemptions. The exemptions from, let's talk about the transparency exemptions, where the Office of Information Practices, generally when citizens want to get information from their government,
yes,
they simply make a query. Now we passed a bill. I know Representative Fontaine and I and our caucus did not vote for it. It was an exemption for having them to give the information, but having the ability to refer it to a court, to where the citizens have to pay with a lawyer to go to court to get money out of the government, exempting them from being open.
So essentially what it is that if I'm a newspaper and I want to look at who your appointees as governor, for example, of who you're looking at as candidates for an appointee, which should be open to the public, and I come to you and I say, okay, I want this information. You can say, I don't want to give it to you, and I have no recourse, but now to go to court to get those records.
Which is going to cost you money.
Exactly, and it's going to cause a delay and everything else. So this really shuts down transparency in a big way.
That is not a good sign
and
of what's happening.
you know, there were many other instances like that. I mean,
But Josh, you did a very creative thing in the amendment, because I know on Maui, your island of Maui, has a particular penchant for the visitor industry. It's one of the most desirable places in the world, if not, I think, winning the most attractive beaches in the world, to have agricultural tourism. And there was a bill by which somebody poorly wrote, which basically excluded that, and you made a floor amendment. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, well, what this bill does is it allows the counties to be able to establish agricultural tourism. And agricultural tourism is quite popular on the island of Maui. We have like a lavender farm, and we have some farms out in Hana. And these are actual farms, and what the folks have to remember is that it's very tough to make it as a farmer. I mean, you know, you go out there and you start farming and you get one mealybug attack on your crops and you lose all your crops for a whole year. You still got to pay the mortgage and everything else. So this was a way that we could help small farmers, legitimate small farmers, not these guys with the gentleman estates, but legitimate small farmers.
Fake farms, yeah.
Right, legitimate farmers. They have to show that they're making a certain amount of income for a year. It was to temporarily accommodate people for less than 21 days. And the stipulation, because Oahu didn't want this, like especially in the North Shore, they put in an exemption to say that only a population between 100 and 150,000. So if you lived in a county that 100 to 150,000, then you could do that, which is essentially what they were aiming at for was Maui County.
Where is a county that has 100 to 150,000?
Well, there isn't any.
There isn't any. Okay, and that's your legislature at work.
So when we went back and we looked at the census numbers, the actual population for Maui County was 154,000. So it's 4,000 over
outside
with
of the boundary.
So I made a floor amendment to raise the exemption from 100 to 170,000.
So it specifically fit Maui's.
So it fit Maui's desire to wanting to do this, and I made the floor amendment, and it was shot down. And everybody was like, huh? I mean, it fixed the bill. But it was very apparent, it was a very partisan move, that they were not going to do it. And it was explained to me later that, you know, they're going to do it in conference, and, you know, don't worry about it, we'll take care of it. And, oh, and thank you very much for flagging that problem. And, you know, and that's the things that make you a little bit frustrated at times, because, you know, it's a good idea, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, shouldn't make any difference. A good idea is a good idea, and we should run with good ideas and encourage them.
And home rule is home rule, and letting the counties have a good share of their own sovereignty, particularly when it's the visitor industry. I know Oahu, as you said, the North Shore is very suspect. My district is very suspect of too many bed and breakfasts, or even other kind of tourism that's a little bit on the sly or under the table. But you guys wanted it and welcome it, and this was a bill that could have done something like that. I
think it'll get fixed, but it's just unfortunate we couldn't just fix it yesterday.
As long as we're in your region of the state, let's go to the undersea cable, where we also had an amendment to get your colleagues across the water to Lanai and Molokai to pull back and basically bypass them.
Right, and we wanted to have an amendment to making sure that Lanai and Molokai could make their own decisions about whether they wanted to be connected to an undersea cable or not. That also died, and it was very unfortunate. And that amendment basically arose out of the fact that last year they tried to push through a bill that would have created, you know, 2 huge wind farms on both of those islands, and they would have put in an undersea cable. They would have taken all the power, put it on Oahu, and when you looked at the deal, the community didn't benefit from it. I mean, you could see if they got free electricity or something else, but there was no, you know, hard incentives for. And the wind farm, the wind farm on Lanai would have taken up 25% of the island. So it was a huge farm that they were planning. It was a big wind farm, and so we tried to help out our neighbor islands by saying, okay, well, we'll look at this, setting up this framework for doing the undersea cable and the feasibility of doing it. But let's keep our smaller islands out of this for now until we get an opportunity to do it. Well, that died too.
The Finance Committee had a chance to visit the island of Molokai, and we talked about the undersea cable, and the people are livid about the big islands and Oahu and all the other ones imposing this on them. And if you remember, even though that the amendment did fail, the actual bill came up then for a discussion, of which, when you mentioned about give us an incentive, give us I called it on the floor, a light at the end of the tunnel, where constituents can actually see cheaper electricity. This is a $1 billion proposition, and I compared it to the investment of the $5 billion, $7 billion to the train.
Right.
If it's going to be out of taxpayers' money, of which all of the HECO electric ratepayers are going to have to pay, they should see that there's something that says, yes, there's an excess of electricity production on the Big Island, of which right now geothermal is 35% of their grid. If they were up to 70, 85%, I'd say, yeah, you know, we got to give. If you guys on Maui had an excess, do you guys have an excess of electricity? Well, we pay almost 40 cents, 38 cents or something like that.
The problem is actually right
hour.
now is we can actually produce more electricity than we can, but unfortunately, because of the way our grid is, I think we're only using about 40% of our capability of renewable energy. We could actually, and now we have an upgrade of the existing wind farm with additional turbines, and then we are also seeing a new wind farm out in, on the south end. They're going to be putting in another wind farm with Sempra Energy is about to come online soon too. They're going to start construction on that. So we're actually kind of maxed out on the profitability side of doing renewable energy, because when these folks sit down to the table with Maui Electric and they say, okay, you know, we agree to buy this electricity from you for X number of cents per kilowatt hour, they have to look at that they're going to be able to sell enough of it to Maui Electric to make back their investment and make a profit. And then, of course, if they're able to bring more online, then they can renegotiate the contract and they can actually buy it from these folks even cheaper, which would then eventually affect the ratepayers, and we would start to see the prices coming down. But the problem is we don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the technology right now to really do a good job of storing power. People don't realize that peak power period for all the islands is about 8 p.m. Well, there's no sun up at 8 p.m., so PV doesn't work, and so you're relying on wind. So it's a real balance between trying to be able to provide a lot of power 24 hours a day and being able to look at being able to store it, looking at other alternatives that don't require wind or sun, perhaps wave, and looking at the big picture. And you know, the grid, we're looking at geothermal now on Maui. There's a good possibility we might be able to do that.
I mean, do you actually have substantial geothermal, or is it where we're going to explore it and see
well,
what
they're going to explore it. They've already done some initial studies where they believe there's a good source of geothermal. You know, on one particular side where it was the latest lava flow, which was back in the 1700s, I think we had a lava flow.
Only a few
so it's only a few hundred years ago, and you know, of course, in geothermal or geo.
But that's my various point. Show me where the excess is, and then I see the necessity and the $1 billion investment.
Well,
makes a lot of sense.
There is. I know for a fact, and well, you should know too. You were up at the wind farm. I took you up there.
In fact, you remind me. I forgot to mention. I was excited to see those. How many? 80 feet in the air. I was excited, but then I was so disappointed when they said they basically have to shut those things down because they can't take the power on the grid.
Exactly.
I mean, that's a waste of the investment. I was so disappointed to see that.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what we're challenged with right now in terms of the big picture. So the idea of putting a cable on Maui to Oahu to be able to sell that excess energy, that's really putting the cart before the horse, because what we really need to do is work on our grid locally first and trying to get us off renewables versus saying, well, we'll worry about Maui later. Let's take that power and shove it over to Oahu. And that's just not really, it's the cart before the horse. I mean, we get to the point where Maui can take care of Maui and we have excess, then great. But otherwise, I think we got to look at it.
In fact, George, you remind me of another disappointment yesterday on the floor. I have been a real advocate of solar on every roof. We should put PV on every roof. We've got now 3% of the Oahu grid, which is from renewable energy. 3%. We're the nation's leaders. Well, that is a poor showing. But my point was, we are taking away those tax credits which we've had in place for the last 2 or 3 years, which now has created 15% of all the jobs in the green industry. It's put a lot of the PV into process, filled the pipeline, but we are going to be pulling the rug from underneath that solar energy, and only you with a lot of money are going to be able to afford it, because the incentives are cataclysmic to be taken away. We've got to balance them, but we've got to slowly ratchet that down.
Well, I think you and I have a little differing opinion about this one, because you know, there is a problem now with the way that the technology is that people can game the system, because there's microinverters and people put up multiple panels on their property, and then unfortunately there is the other issue where you have multiple homes on a single TMK map, which is what they're going to do.
I don't argue that.
Yeah, but we have to do something about the people that abused it, and there were people that at one point were abusing the system, and they were going out and getting repetitive credits. And so, you know, at some point, you know, it's like the cost of solar is up here and our electric cost is here, and at some point there's going to have to be a convergence where the cost comes down and the rate comes up so much that then it makes sense for the PV. But because it's so expensive right now, and we have to do these tax incentives, but we can't let the solar companies, you know, be on the government, you know, forever. It's got to be at some point, these credits are not going to like be forever and ever. I think at some point, when industry is it at a point where you're going to be able to offer a system for the consumers without that will be affordable to them, without costing an arm and a leg, and that a consumer can literally go out and buy it on their own.
This is exactly why I call the floor of the House of Representatives the marketplace of idea. You're hearing one of the marketplace of ideas. Who's going to buy into keeping the solar credits and not keeping the solar credits? One difficulty I have with the argument that you've just made is that if you look at the solar water heating incentives that we've had in place probably for 25 years, right now the penetration of the state of Hawaii for just heating your water is 29 or 30%. We've had these incentives, the ones that you are saying, those are a waste of, well, not a, you didn't say waste of money, but those are taxpayers' money, like $29 million a year, going out the door to give people an incentive to get the PV. Right now, if we can't even get people to put solar water heater, how are we going to get them to do PV, which is 2 to 3 times as expensive?
And I'm not disagreeing with you on that. I think that the incentives have to remain in place now, but what I'm talking about is at some point energy costs is going to rise.
Yes.
And at some point manufacturing of solar panels will come down. And when that graph converges, that's where we need to look at the body and the industry together and saying, you know, consumer, this is now so affordable that anybody can go out and buy it. Where, like, I looked at getting a system for my house, it was going to be like $60,000 to put solar up on my house.
Who's got that amount of money?
Exactly, you know, but unfortunately I'm in a situation where I don't have, I pay very little tax, you know, because I don't, you know, make that, I'm not a millionaire, I don't make that kind of money. So the point is that tax credits don't help me because it's a tax credit. So if I'm paying very little tax to begin with,
you mean versus a tax refund?
Exactly.
Okay, tax credit meaning off of what?
Yeah. So if I had a tax bill of, you know, $2,000 or $3,000 a year or whatever, and I could take that credit and apply it to that tax that I would pay, then it makes sense. But for me right now, it's like my CPA told me it doesn't make any sense for you.
I think it's the same reason why General Motors stopped their production of the Volt, because people weren't buying it. And my sense is
it's too expensive. It's $45,000.
If we don't incentivize with these tax credits, it's going to be where we got $5 billion that we ship, some say almost $6 billion we ship out for the oil.
Well, the good news is I just did a show on this on the Fontaine Factor, folks. If you go onto YouTube and look for this
let's
later
put a plug
on.
in Fontaine Factor.
Yeah. We just did a show on the Japanese-U.S. partnership for smart grid technology. It's an exciting program, and I don't want to tell you, we have very little time left here, and I really want to talk about this one other bill.
Please do.
But please check it out. We're one of a kind in the nation, a partnership between Maui and Japan, and doing some smart grid experimentation. It's a fantastic show. We got $37 million being invested by Hitachi into with a mutual of understanding agreement between us and Japan.
Excellent.
It's a great show. But I wanted to talk about this one bill that I'm really concerned about, and that's the one where they basically inserted took a really good bill about helping military families being taken advantage of by payday loans, which is what the bill was for, was try to help the military families, which is great. And then they decided to stick in a really sour piece to it, But they did it because they didn't want anybody to vote against military families, basically. Because if you
The
voted
sweet
no,
and the sour together.
yeah, it was a sweet and sour deal. And this basically says that the taxpayers of the state of Hawaii are going to go out and buy up foreclosed mortgages with taxpayer dollars and take these over and provide relief. And it's just wrong on so many levels that the state would put the taxpayers' dollars at risk into some kind of venture on that. It was a really, really dirty trick.
Highly risk proposition, and what will really scare people when they learn about the details of it, that it's condemning private property under the eminent domain. Some of you used to live in lease to fee conversion. It was because of the Supreme Court allowing for the public good a lot of the Bishop Estate and other estates' lands to be going from lease to fee conversion. Right now, this says if you got a toxic mortgage, the state will claim it and then put it in this reservoir of which then they're going to, quote, make money on it.
Right.
I don't see how it's possible. There's a lot of risk. There's no FDIC guarantees, et cetera, which gives me to my worst bill and fear for the session, is that going through the Senate is the House bill to create a state bank.
Yes.
Which Governor Abercrombie would be the chairman of the board. There would be union members on the board. It would be people who I believe have a difficult time running the state, and to be able to run a bank and keep a fiduciary responsibility of a level.
And don't forget the union board member on the board.
And a union member on the board, which means that if these bills pass, the one about buying toxic mortgage, the one about the state bank, all of the current account or the checking account of the state going into political leadership, like the model, which is the Bank of North Dakota, which we keep idolizing. We had even a conference call at 6 a.m. in the morning. But I see that the clock on the wall says, George Fontaine, thank you for all you do for the people of Maui.
Well, same to you, Representative Ward. You do an awesome job representing Hawaii Kai. The people out there really respect you. You do a great job.
And thank you, the people of Hawaii, for staying in tune with the Better Government Show and the Minority Caucus, bringing you hopefully more information each time that we are here. Thank you, and aloha for viewing.